In the Pacific Northwest, there are not a lot of theme parks and roller coasters, and so among those parks and coasters, Silverwood stands out as being the best. In this video, I'll explain why Silverwood is worth a visit and give you all of the tips and details of what it looks like to visit this park in 2025 or beyond. But before we get to what the park is like present day, let's take a quick trip down memory lane to see where this park came from, because it has a pretty interesting history. The roots of Silverwood aren't even related to theme parks. In 1973, Clayton Henley founded the Henley Aerodome. Just 8 years later though, in 1981, Gary Norton purchased the Aerodome. Silverwood opened in more of a modern form in 1988. This is when we had Main Street, the air shows, and a train. The park expanded relatively quickly though, because just a couple of years later, they added the Roaring Creek Log Flume, which was relocated from Kentucky Kingdom, and the Corkscrew, which was relocated from Knott's Berry Farm, in addition to the entire Country Carnival area being added. The big additions for Silverwood came later in the 90s, most notably Timber Terror in 1996, which was originally named Grizzly. This wood coaster bears a sign with the park's name on the side, and so it literally and figuratively functions as a billboard for Silverwood, and that was part of the intent. Very tragically, that same year in 1996, they had to discontinue and ultimately stop their air shows after the death of a pilot. This horrible accident ultimately led Silverwood to focus more on traditional rides and attractions, and that included the addition of Tremors in 1999. These two wood coasters, Timber Terror and Tremors, really put this park on the map, and they still do. Silverwood was growing at a great rate, and in 2003, they added the Boulder Beach Water Park. When you visit Silverwood and you get your ticket, you'll have both access to the dry park and the water park, assuming the water park is open, only during the summer, and that's a really nice option. There aren't too many major water parks up in the Pacific Northwest either, in particular outdoor ones, and again, this park has a pretty remote location. For context as to how north this park is, Silverwood is less than 100 miles from Canada. It's also less than 50 miles from Spokane, Washington. What this means is that if you're flying into the area for Silverwood specifically, flying into Spokane is probably going to be your best option. There are other airports that are closer, but Spokane is an international airport and it's only about an hour away. It's also worth noting that if you're looking to make it into a longer vacation for you and your family, Silverwood is less than 25 miles away from Coeur d'Alene. Coeur d'Alene is very pretty in its own right, and there's a lot to check out, especially in the downtown area down there. So just wanted to make note of that because you can tack some things onto a Silverwood trip if you'd like to. While there are attractions in the area, there are no major theme parks anywhere near it. I would say the closest major park is Lagoon in Utah, and that's about 700 miles away. You also have Six Flags Discovery Kingdom in the Bay Area, but that's about 900 miles away. Safe to say that in the theme park world, Silverwood is pretty much on its own up there. So while the location of Silverwood does make it difficult to get to, once you're there you really appreciate it because everything around Silverwood is very pretty, and that translates to within the park's borders as well. Idaho in general is one of the more beautiful states you'll find, and Silverwood puts a lot of work into keeping their park beautiful between water features, flowers, trees, etc. The abundance of trees on the dry side can lead to a lot of shade, and that's definitely helpful. Overall, Silverwood is a very nicely presented park. I wouldn't say many rides are really themed, more so stylized. I also appreciate how for the majority of the park, Silverwood plays banjo music instead of the typical pop music you find at most amusement parks. It's little touches like this that can make your day a lot more enjoyable when you're at a theme park, in my opinion. One of the things you probably won't enjoy about Silverwood, and honestly this is the biggest con, is the price. If you're looking at tickets online, which you absolutely should, you should definitely purchase them in advance because you'll save $10 no matter what ticket you're buying. It'll be $74 for a single day, $115 for 2 days, or $149 for 3 days. Silverwood is a high quality park, especially in its presentation, but I think that $74 is a little bit steep. Now, always keep your eyes out for deals and sales online. This is something we took advantage of on our visit. Now, you might be wondering, do I really need 3 days to experience Silverwood Theme Park? And the short answer is no. And the long answer is no. In all seriousness though, as we go through the attraction lineup, you'll probably see that there are a lot of things worth doing here, and if you want to hit the water park and the dry park, you might be really pressed for time if you just have one day. Part of that is the fact that this park's hours are just okay. During the summer, they're usually open 11 to 7, if not shorter. This means that you can definitely be pressed for time if you want to ride everything in a single day. So if you want to do the water park, I think your best option is that 2-day ticket. This will also give you a bit more time for re-rides when you're at the park. Now, in terms of where you stay while you're visiting Silverwood, there are a couple of different options. Possibly the most convenient is the RV park, which is located right across the street. There's some small amenities here that you can enjoy, but the biggest one is discounted tickets to Silverwood Theme Park. and depending on your RV, prices range from $56 to $76 per night. This is a cool option if you want to stay nearby, and for anyone interested, check-in is at 1 p.m. and check-out is at 10 p.m. If you're looking for a more traditional hotel, your closest options are going to be in the aforementioned Coeur d'Alene. Now, because Silverwood is located in northern Idaho, weather can definitely play a factor in your visit. As you might imagine, this park is not open year-round. They do have the very famous Scarywood event around Halloween time, where they run Timber Terror backwards and have a selection of haunts and attractions. In the summertime though, it's usually very nice. That being said, you gotta be a little bit careful because Aftershock, one of the star coasters at the park, will not open unless it is over 60 degrees. In Idaho, that is most certainly not a guarantee. One thing that Aftershock and the other coasters in Roller Coaster Alley do is create an impressive first impression. Driving down the freeway, it is impossible to miss Silverwood when you have all the major coasters set up right up against the road. Seeing them, and sometimes even seeing them test cycle before the park opens, really gets you excited for your day. Now, the arrival experience for Silverwood is a bit odd. You see, the parking lot is actually across the street, and it's by the RV park. You have to take a tunnel underneath the road to get to the actual park entrance. It's kind of a cool discovery experience in a way, and I know there are some parks on the East Coast like Kennywood that have this same sort of thing. Even if you park as close as you possibly can, you're still looking at 5 to 10 minutes before you're actually at the park gate, factoring in going through security. Speaking of which, they were pretty efficient here, which is appreciated. You then can either take a ramp or go up the stairs and find yourself at the front entrance of Silverwood. Not to compare Silverwood to Disneyland, because I'm not sure if that's entirely fair, but this entry area does remind me a bit of Disneyland, between the brickwork on the ground, the music that plays, and the structure of the buildings. It's a solid first look into what your day is going to be like at Silverwood. Once you go through the gates and take a left around the Lindy's restaurant, you then have an option to go left for the dry park or right for the water park. There's a large area of grass in between, and it takes 10 or so minutes to walk from the main section of the dry park to the entrance of the water park. Silverwood does see decent rope drop crowds, so I would definitely recommend arriving to the park about a half hour early, that way you can be towards the front of that rope drop crowd. And assuming you are, here's where I would recommend you go. Let's start with the scenario that you are just going to the dry park. Go to Roller Coaster Alley and hit Timber Terror first. This ride builds up a line quickly. From here, move on to Aftershock and try to give that one a ride before the queue builds up. Then check and see what the line is like for Tremors. If it looks pretty short, you can give it a go, but if it isn't, I would recommend saving it later, because typically Silverwood adds a second train to both Tremors and Stunt Pilot later in the day. They start the day with just one train on each. Make your way back through Roller Coaster Alley now and hit Spincycle. This pendulum is worth doing. Then there's also Stunt Pilot, but again, I would say the same thing for Stunt Pilot that I did for Tremors. If it has a short wait, you can ride it, but if it has a pretty long wait, I would come back later when they've added that second train. In the case of Stunt Pilot, it also warms up a lot as the day goes on. Just look and see how slow it's running first thing in the morning. Now, they don't add a second train every single day from what I've seen, but if it's on the busier side or you're in the summertime, there seems to be a pretty good chance. If the water rides are a priority to you, then you should also hit the Roaring Creek Log Flume and the Thunder Canyon River Rapids ride pretty soon, because those build up big weights. Now, if you're planning to go to the water park, I would actually think it's wise to start your day over at Boulder Beach. Think about it this way, the warmest part of the day is the afternoon and evening. That's when people want to get wet on rides the most. And of course, cool off from that brutal heat that Idaho is known for. So what does this mean? Well, during these times, it is the busiest and lines are the longest. So if you want to get ahead of the crowds, that's not such a bad idea. Now, I admittedly know a lot less and have experienced a lot less of the water park than the dry park, but thinking about it logically and basing it off of what slides were the longest, I think a good touring plan would be as follows. You start with the best slide, which is Eagle Hunt, the Dueling Water Coaster. Then start making your way to the other side riding Riptide Racer and then Avalanche Mountain. Going to Avalanche Mountain at this time will cause you to backtrack a little bit, but I think it ultimately works itself out because this is possibly the most popular slide in the entire water park, so you want to hit it pretty early. After that, you can ride Ricochet Rapids, Velocity Peak, and Rumble Falls. Velocity Peak and Rumble Falls both have multiple slides intertwined. When you're done with all the water slides you want to do, you can then head back over to the dry park, and hopefully by this time, Tremors and Stunt Pilot will have their 2 trains. Speaking of Stunt Pilot, that's a great place to start in terms of this park's attraction lineup. Let's start with the attractions of Roller Coaster Alley. Stunt Pilot is the park's newest coaster, and it's also their best. Is it basically a clone of Railblazer and Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster? Yes. Is it still very good though? Yes. It was neat to see Silverwood finally get a coaster from RMC because the two companies have had a long-lasting relationship. RMC has played a major role in both Timber Terror and Tremors over the years, and they also were major in the construction of the Boulder Beach Water Park. Now Silverwood finally has a coaster from the company that they've worked with for so long. Stunt Pilot has some really great elements. Like the other single rail coasters, there are some powerful airtime hills here, and I think the twisted airtime hill halfway through is the star. You get ejected from your seat no matter where you're sitting on this one, and that happens the same if you're towards the back on the train for the first drop and the drop off the S-bend. Even though they added 2 seats for increased capacity, I appreciate the near misses they threw in here, and the pacing is still very good. The ride is unfortunately quite short, but everything that Stunt Pilot has is very good, and you flow from one element to the next seamlessly. It's a ton of fun. Speaking of a ton of fun, let's talk about Tremors. This is the better of the 2 wooden coasters at Silverwood. And to be frank, it's not particularly close. Tremors has a really interesting layout, using multiple tunnels, and you never really know what direction you're going to go next. I appreciate the varied nature of this coaster's layout. While some airtime hills don't hit quite the same as they look like they should, there are still some good out-of-your-seat moments mixed with laterals. And again, those tunnels are pretty sweet. You got 2 on the front end and 2 on the back end, and for first-time riders, you might not really expect them. It's a cool touch that makes this coaster all the more fun. One of the neat things that Silverwood did in 2025 was give this coaster 2 new Millennium Flyer trains, along with retracking sections of the coaster. I rode Tremors on its opening day of the year, and so I imagine as these trains continue to run more and more, they'll get faster and faster. This train you're seeing right now was actually the very first train with guests on it for the 2025 season. Improved capacity and comfort for an awesome coaster. There's also Timber Terror in this area, which is of course the other wooden coaster. I said Tremors is the better of the 2, and it's not particularly close, and while that is true, Timber Terror is still a very enjoyable ride. The layout is much simpler, featuring an out and back course with a helix at the end. Timber Terror has no shortage of hills, a few of which will lift you out of your seat for some nice floater airtime, especially if you're towards the back of the train. And like Tremors, there are some good moments of laterals as well, in particular that final helix, having sustained laterals for multiple seconds. I would love to see this coaster get the Tremors treatment though, in terms of new trains and a little bit of retracking. It would really help the capacity, and this is something we'll come back to in a little bit. The most forceful coaster at Silverwood, in terms of G-forces, is Aftershock, the Vekoma giant inverted boomerang. It's also probably the freakiest coaster at the park, especially if you have a fear of heights, because you'll be staring straight down at the ground for the lift hill. You then fly through the station and into a familiar feeling layout if you've ever ridden Boomerang, but don't worry, this is far better than your traditional Boomerang. The elements are huge, supersized, much more forceful, and I thought this ride was actually running pretty smooth. There are multiple good seats on this coaster, and it ultimately depends on what you're looking for, but I think the best seat is up front. You get the full drop on the backwards drop, and you really feel the force, especially going through the vertical loop on the backwards portion. Aftershock is not for the faint of heart, but it is definitely a really solid coaster. Moving on to some of the other rides in this area, you of course have Spincycle, another very freaky attraction for a lot of people. This pendulum ride is about one thing and one thing only, and that is hang time, and it's pretty dang wild how long you're upside down on this attraction. It really does feel like you're going to stall out on those full rotations, and you're up there for multiple seconds at a time. The blood might even start to rush to your head because of how long you're up there. Now, besides dizziness and everything like that, one potential issue some might have with it is that this ride does not have a sense of speed. The speed feels very controlled and almost unnatural. For that reason, it's very different than, say, your Zamperla Giant Discoveries. It's no doubt worth doing though, and then you can compare them and see which one you prefer. Panic Plunge is the other main flat ride in this area. This drop tower is not particularly tall, but boy, is it powerful. The drop is very short because the tower is only 140 feet in the air, but it really feels like you're being pulled down the tower, not just being dropped. That's how powerful it is, and you definitely will float the whole way down. And despite the fact that it's not particularly tall, you still get a wonderful view, whether that's of the mountains or of the park. If you couldn't tell, Rollercoaster Alley is where it's at if you want the thrill rides. The 6 most thrilling rides in the entirety of the dry park are located in this one area. This has positive and negative results. On the one hand, coaster enthusiasts and thrill seekers know exactly where they want to spend the majority of their time. On the other hand, it can kind of keep you from exploring other sections of the park. Because at the end of the day, none of the rides in the other sections are going to top the ones here. This also means that the longest lines are going to be found in this area, mostly for the 4 biggest coasters, and Spincycle can build up a little bit of a line as well. So what else does Rollercoaster Alley have? Well, there are a couple of places that you can dine or get desserts. Chuckwagon has all-you-can-eat barbecue. Cool Cactus is a Mexican restaurant across from Timber Terror, which is decent. And there's also the South Creamery, where you can get huckleberry milkshakes. Some friends of mine got the latter, and they looked quite tasty. Let's move on from Rollercoaster Alley now, and talk about Country Carnival. Unsurprisingly, given the area's name, there are quite a few midway games and even an arcade that you can check out and spend some time in if you so like. But there are also some more permanent rides here. Corkscrew is probably the most famous in the sense that this was a piece of roller coaster history. When this opened in 1976 at Knott's Berry Farm, it was the first coaster in the modern era to go upside down. Obviously, it's been relocated to Silverwood, and all things considered, it's not running horrible considering its age, but it's certainly not running super well either. This coaster isn't super rough, but it is bumpy, and some of those transitions are pretty atrocious, which I guess is 70s aerodynamics for you. In general, definitely give it a spin for the history, but you probably won't want to go back for another ride. Also in this area are all the water rides on the dry side. The best of the bunch is the Roaring Creek Log Flume. It's still so incredible to think that this ride was relocated from Kentucky Kingdom. It feels like it's been here forever, and it fits beautifully within the setting. In fact, I wish it moved slower to allow you to appreciate all of that scenery. The drop at the end is fun, though not very intense or soaking. What can get you soaked on this ride is the two geysers that can potentially go off. There's one in about the middle of the ride and one directly at the end of the experience. Both of these can get you absolutely soaked, though they don't go off every time because guests have to pay a quarter to have them go off. So Roaring Creek Log Flume can either be a nice sprinkle or absolutely soaked. On the other hand, you will 100% get soaked on the Thunder Canyon River Rapids ride. From my experience, your chances of coming off this ride anything but soaked are, let's see, let me do my calculations, 0. In addition to the rapids, which are pretty good, there is a waterfall that'll grab about half the boat, and the ride in general has a nice setting amongst the trees. If these two weren't enough for you, there was also the bumper boats. Now, you won't get nearly as wet on these as you will on the other two, but they're still a fun experience. Now, I guess I shouldn't guarantee that because when you give guests water guns, anything can happen. There's also a bunch of flat rides set throughout this area, and two classics include the Paratrooper and the Ferris wheel, though be warned because these rides load very slowly. In fact, the park was kind enough to put signs out in front of their entrances telling you as much. There are also some car-based rides. These include the Antique Cars, which are okay over by Corkscrew, and the Crazy Cars bumper cars. I always appreciate this style of bumper cars where you can have a lot more maneuverability. Country Carnival overall has a decent selection of rides, but I really feel like there's no real draw to this area outside of those two water attractions. So if you don't want to get wet, I guess the main draw is Corkscrew, and at this point that's not much of a draw, frankly. I would love to see another coaster added to this area in future years, but we'll get to some of that stuff in a little bit. You can also find a couple of good snack/dessert options in here with Sugar Shack and the Ice Creamery. Let's talk now about Critter Camp, which is the kids area. More than anything, this area is just cute, and there are a couple of small coasters that you can ride if you want the credits. The more respectable of the two is the SBF Spinning Coaster or Crazy Coaster. This one has some fun spinning and is a good introduction to the genre for kids. You can find these all over the place. Tiny 2, on the other hand, is one that even I skipped on. This coaster almost has no change in elevation and would be a pretty embarrassing one to ride without little kids. That being said, it's still great that they have it, and this is probably the first coaster in the lives of many kids in the Pacific Northwest. Let's go back to the front now for the last area of the dry park, and that is of course Main Street. This area has some cool buildings and shopping, but definitely the biggest attraction here is the Magic Show. Theater of Illusion Magic Show is one of the most famous things about this park, and unfortunately it was the most major thing that I missed on my visit, but some people in my family said that it was really good and lived up to all the hype. Definitely give it a watch. There's also a saloon and the sit-down restaurant in Lindy's. This is the premier restaurant at Silverwood and your best option for food here. And lastly, we of course can't forget about the train. This is one of the more impressive train rides you're going to find at a theme park, as it goes all the way outside the park's borders. Along with the park and nature, there's some props to see, and real-life buffalo as well. More notable though is the show scene about halfway through. The train will stop and you can see a show going on right beside the train. Now you have to check the schedule for the train to see which show you're going to get, and you can pick and choose which one you want. On that note, make sure you check the show times for the Magic Show as well. During our visit, the shows were at 3 and 5 p.m., but it could change. So those are all the major attractions on the dry side of Silverwood, but let's go over to the water park now in Boulder Beach and see what's over there. There are some pretty solid slides that you can ride here. The best of the bunch is probably Eagle Hunt, the dueling water coaster. As of this recording, this was the last major addition to the park, and I love it. There are multiple sections where the tracks run right next to each other, and there are also multiple uphill ascents that'll get you absolutely soaked from behind at the top of each hill. Velocity Peak is a cluster of speed slides. These are going to be the most thrilling slides in the entire water park. Then you also have a couple raft slides. These include Ricochet Rapids and Avalanche Mountain. Avalanche Mountain doesn't have any big drops, but it is fun through and through, and sometimes you slide up those walls pretty far, and it's also neat how you can go down the hill. Gotta love terrain-based rides. Rumble Falls is not terrain-based, but it's a nice set of tube slides for everyone to enjoy. Then, of course, you have Riptide Racer, which is your mat racing slide. These are fun, but this ride is not particularly original to Silverwood. You can find these at water parks all across the country and the world. In addition to the slides, there are also some attractions for kids, a wave pool, and of course a lazy river. If you wanted to ride all the slides and get re-rides, you could spend practically a full day just at Boulder Beach, and I'm sure there are people that do just that, especially locals. Now, my time in Boulder Beach was very brief, but I overall enjoyed it, and it looks like a very nicely presented water park, and there's some solid slides to go around. Couple quick notes for logistical things. If you want to rent a locker, it's going to cost you $10 per locker, and if you want to rent a tube, you'll probably need this for the lazy river, that's going to cost you an additional $10. When you factor in the dry park and the water park, Silverwood has a lot of really solid attractions, but there are definitely some areas I would like to see them add into. And in addition to that, types of rides that Silverwood doesn't currently have that could do really well here. The first one that of course comes to mind is a dark ride. Some of the rides and areas already have pockets of theming, but I would love to see something a bit more committed to a theme. Another major gap is a launch coaster. It's almost surprising that Silverwood doesn't have one at this point, to be honest. The last major gap I think of is a family coaster. They've got 2 kids coasters and then 5 thrill coasters, but nothing really in between. It's for these reasons that I think a perfect next addition for Silverwood from a coaster standpoint would be a Vekoma family launch coaster, something similar to a Big Bear Mountain at Dollywood. You're basically killing 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak, and I think that this type of modern experience at Silverwood could do really well. Now, the hope would be that they would have multiple trains running on a coaster like this, because at times, capacity is definitely an issue for Silverwood and their coasters. This is part of the reason why I would not recommend a family boomerang here. They already have enough low capacity rides. When you look at operations in general at Silverwood Theme Park, I think it's probably the biggest con outside of the ticket prices, because sometimes operations can be pretty slow. Now, it's not necessarily the fault of the employees. From my experience, Timber Terra always starts and ends the day with just a single employee. Considering this is one of the most popular rides in the park, that's a tough ask of 1 employee. Give them some credit though, they were working hard, and sometimes that train was even dispatched in under 4 minutes, which with 1 person working everything is pretty dang impressive. But if one thing takes longer than expected, you're looking at a pretty long dispatch time. Timber Terra is one of those situations where it's just kind of tough on the employees. Aftershock is one that's kind of tough from a policy standpoint. Namely because they must first check seatbelts and then go through again to check the over-the-shoulder restraints. This just adds a lot of time. That being said, big shout out to the crews on both Tremors and Stunt Pilot. When those coasters were running 2 trains in the afternoon, those lines were moving at a pretty good clip, and that Stunt Pilot crew was really getting those trains out as fast as they could. Operations are definitely a mixed bag here. Policies, staffing, and capacity all play into it. But despite some of the flaws, Silverwood Theme Park is absolutely worth a visit. I would say if you find yourself in Idaho, you can give it a visit, but I don't really know if you're going to find yourself near this park. You kind of have to go out of your way to visit it. But it is worth going out of your way for. They really do a great job in a lot of areas. The top 3 and even top 4 coasters are solid. The staff is friendly and helpful, the areas are all presented nicely, and it's a very pleasant park to be in between the natural beauty and all the rides cycling around you. I'll also have a very special connection to this park for many reasons, namely though, going here on my grad trip. So in general, definitely give Silverwood a visit if you can. So those are my thoughts on Silverwood Theme Park in Athol, Idaho. Let me know down in the comment section below what you think of this park if you visited, and I hope you found this helpful if you're thinking about visiting. And as always, if you'd be so kind as to consider liking and subscribing, I would appreciate it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Connor's YouTube channel.